Thanks, everyone. Like I said, a lot of familiar faces here, a lot of new faces here, too. My name's Jason Grillo. I'm the event director for AirMiners. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Happy to welcome you to our AirMiners event on biochar, finding the killer application for this space. Biochar is an interesting field in that there's been a lot of activity here and a lot of opportunity here. Still, there are we've seen amazing ways of applying biochar in soil amendments and in other places, and it has tremendous potential to grow into a solution not just for creating products and putting into soil, but also for drawing down carbon, which is the rationale behind us at AirMiners. So we have an excellent panel today, moderated by Paul Pizzala, to whom I'll introduce you in a minute. A couple of housekeeping items. We are going to have our typical panel discussion for about 40 or 45 minutes now. Then we'll open the, then we'll field your questions, give them to the panel for them to answer for the last maybe 10 or 15 minutes of our session. Please put your questions into the Zoom chat. That way, Tito Jankowski and I can look through the chat and then filter them to our moderator, Paul Pizzala. Also, at the top of the hour, once we're finished, we will have a Zoom networking session so that we can get to know each other, digest what I'm sure will be some very insightful comments from our panel today. And then we'll do that in the series of Zoom breakout rooms for about maybe 15, 20 minutes or so afterwards. So feel free to stay for that, but if you don't have time, then that's perfectly all right as well. With that, I'm going to, I'll be back in maybe a few minutes before the top of the hour with some concluding remarks, and then we'll take it from there. Meanwhile, enjoy the discussion, and I will cede the floor to Paul Pizzala. Paul.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jason. Real pleasure to be here. And I'm coming to you from London today. And just as a bit of framing and context setting, I wanted to say that, as we all know, killer apps in any context, whether it's the arts, science, or commerce, emerge over time and have long histories of evolution. There's a lot of trial and error and good fortune before becoming universally accepted. And so today, we're really fortunate to have Heloise Buckland, Andy Mercer, and Henrietta Moon on the panel from the UK, the US, and Finland, who, as entrepreneurs in this space, have had many aha moments between them and experienced the trials and errors of driving an emerging industry forward. So I'd like to turn to you, the panelists, and ask you to introduce yourselves in a few sentences, please. And then I'd like to kick off the conversation by asking what drew you into biochar and whether there were any aha moments along the way. So in time-honored tradition, perhaps we could start with you, Heloise.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much, Paul and AirMiners, for organising this event. My name's Heloise Buckland. I am co-founder and CEO of Husk, and we have set ourselves a mission to tackle soil degradation, poverty, and climate change, all wrapped up in one, by transforming Husk into biochar to regenerate soils, to sequester carbon, and to improve smallholder livelihoods. And we have our first operations in Cambodia, where we've been running for the last couple of years, and creating a blueprint to replicate that across the world.
Brilliant, thanks. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Andy Mercy. I'm not the true brains of this operation. The founder and CEO is a guy named Josiah Hunt, but I joined recently as head of strategy to help with the opportunity at Pacific Biochar, which we think is really exciting. And basically, we take forest residue wastes, we convert it into biochar. Those residues are coming out of high forest fire risk forests in Northern California primarily. turn it into biochar, and our goal is to get the carbon back into the soil. I was always inspired by Bill McDonough of Cradle to Cradle when he made the observation that waste equals food. And biochar to me is a fantastic example of that, where we can turn organic waste streams into a legacy of fertile soil and protect our food systems. So that's what we're trying to do at Pacific Biochar, and it's a really exciting time for the industry.
Fantastic, thanks, Andy. And Henrietta, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm Henrietta Moon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Carboculture. We're a Nordic Californian team, and what would I say? We're on a mission to draw down carbon, and I think that's what got me excited about biochar in the first place. That the way to draw down carbon can be so simple as to leverage biology and do it by converting biomass that's already taken the carbon down, instead of trying to invent machinery and chemistry that can take parts per million out of the atmosphere. We have a system that's already doing it annually. And so I think that was the main thing about biochar that was so incredible, and also the kind of fact that you can use it as a tool in all sorts of environmental remediation on top of the carbon drawdown. So yeah, happy to be here today.
Brilliant. That's fantastic, and really good to see you covering different continents, or at least, yeah, the US, Europe, and Heloise, I think you're in Vietnam, right? That's where you're based, and I just wonder, maybe you could touch on how did things get started in Vietnam?
So I have to correct you, Paul. We're in Cambodia, next to Vietnam. And interestingly, well, how things started there, our starting point was actually, how can we support smallholder livelihoods, given that smallholders, the approximately 3 billion people on the planet are the ones that suffer the most from soil degradation and climate change. And our starting point was actually the residues that they have in abundance that we, myself and co-founders, thought we could add value to. And our aha moment was after a year and a half of researching what could we do with rice husk, scanning all of the incredible technologies around the world on rice husk. The aha moment was when we came back to the Cambodian farmers and realized what they've been doing with rice husk for the last thousands of years is turning it into biochar. So it was a very kind of humbling moment after researching lots of technologies from very many different sectors, that the answer was actually staring us in the face, that we could turn rice husk into biochar, because this is what farmers have always done. The challenge is now that farmers don't have access to this husk through industrialization. The rice husk piles up at the rice mill, and they end up purchasing chemical fertilizers and further degrading their soils. So what we've done is install pyrolysis technology inside the rice mill where the husk is, and that's where we convert it into biochar. So we are not selling anything new. Biochar has been around for millennia. And in the case of Cambodia and other Southeast Asian countries, it's still very much in the memory that it makes sense. And in the words of Cambodian farmers, make soil soft. So what we're doing is using technology and distribution to make an age-old practice available to farmers today.
That's really good to know. So there's a really long history in Cambodia, and I imagine there's a really long history in other places in the world. And so Heloise, you mentioned you're using rice husk, and Andy, you touched on using forest waste in high-risk areas of fire. Henrietta, what feedstocks are you using in your process? And maybe you could touch a little bit on, what does the opportunity look like now, say, compared to 5 years ago?
Yeah. So to the first question of feedstock, our first facility is in California's Central Valley, and we're actually using walnut shells and peach pits and other wood-like waste materials. And there's plenty of that in California Central Valley that produces a lot of the world's nuts and foods. And so for the second one, I mean, it's really dramatical what has shifted in even the past 6 months, I'd say, even the past 3 months. 6 years ago, when we started looking at this space, or now it's, I guess, 7, 8 years ago. But in any case, when we started looking at the space with Chris, my co-founder, people weren't really rallied up about climate change. It was like a niche of the population, and biochar was quite new and quite niche, and now it's actually being discussed as one of the main tools to combat climate change, which makes sense because this is like, it's such a no-brainer that we need plants to remove the carbon, but then the plants don't stay stable, so you actually need the biochar to keep the stability. And so it's been really amazing to see the response in the carbon markets in everywhere changing in the past half a year. So I think I just, like, one more thing is that the carbon removal price for something like biochar used to be maybe $50 a ton a year ago, and now it's minimum double to that, at least on some platforms. So that gives an idea of what has changed, really.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's great. That's good to know. So feedstocks play an important part. But Andy, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the part that technology plays in creating is technology the killer app, Andy?
Yeah, I would say not at this point, at least from our perspective. You know, biochar, as Heloise pointed out, and some people may know, is one of the oldest technologies known to our species. As long as we've been burning things, we've been creating biochar, and as long as things have been burning through natural forces, we've been creating biochar. So, you know, our approach is to work within the context of biomass energy plants, which are large, complex, to some extent, you know, expensive pieces of machinery, but we're able to come in with a fairly low tech and low cost modification and tap into their process and extract charcoal from the combustion process. And so in our case, using a low-tech solution, we can create very large quantities of biochar. And just to echo something that Henrietta said, carbon credits have really been a game changer, because no one has, or very few have disputed the agronomic benefits of biochar. The scientific literature has exploded on that score, but very recently, we are now seeing the opportunity to sell carbon credits. The methodologies were just created recently. And in fact, the United States, the first carbon credits for biochar were just issued in Q4 of 2020. So this is just happening in real time, but that is a game changer, because now not only can we sell biochar to farmers or whomever the end user might be, but we can also sell carbon credits, which is a huge inflection point opportunity for this drawdown technology that is biochar.
I think that was us who sold the first credits last year.
We can debate that later.
Brilliant. Well, that's very interesting, actually, because I mean, it's great to see the competitive side of you, Henrietta. But could you maybe tell us a little bit about how the biochar evangelists work together to promote the industry? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, biochar is really interesting. It's like a small group of entrepreneurs, and I kind of sometimes like to compare it to the electric cars of the world. Like, without enough of them, the infrastructure won't grow to actually support that industry. I feel that in some ways, biochar has a little bit of the same thing. But luckily, we're also seeing a lot of diversification in terms of like locality or different kinds of applications or different kinds of use cases or you know, like Heloise and Andy have very different technologies that are completely at different ends of the spectrum. So it's kind of cool that one industry that's so large can fit so many different kinds of shapes and forms.
Yeah, fantastic. And what, Heloise, what's your sort of what's your experience of collaboration in Cambodia with, you know, other players in the market, and who was it that kind of helped you on your way to get to where you are today? And I know that you've done a lot of work on thinking about branding and marketing and educating your users of the applications that you're creating. Could you talk a little bit about that, please, and how the marketing side is really important as a killer app all of its own?
Sure. I guess just coming to the point that you were asking Henrietta about in terms of the industry bodies, I do feel grateful for the work that the International Biochar Initiative, the IBI, are doing on a global scale, and also the EBC, the European Biochar Certificate. These networks and platforms have been very useful for us as we've started. Also in our journey, so we're two women founded Husk. We've had just an incredible amount of support from funders in terms of grant making bodies, accelerator programs, you know, all the usual players, I guess, that help us any startup. But what's been perhaps different on this journey, because I've started and founded other companies, is that people get really excited about biochar. And I've actually brought some along with me just so you can see. So this is what we're talking about. You can see this is rice husk biochar. So already in small pieces, which is very handy. So I'm sure Andy has a lot of work having to crush and organize the biomass before they pyrolyze it. But just the excitement has brought us academics, volunteers, MBA students. You know, we've had a wealth of interest, and so that's been very supportive. And just to finish on who's supported us in our journey, we are now, after 3 years of bootstrapping the company, we're now in our first investment round, and we've had individual high net worth individuals and other supporters who have decided to, you know, pitch in. And by the way, I will plug, we are still fundraising. So there are 2 tickets left if anyone out there wants to support an exciting biochar company. And in terms of marketing in Cambodia, we are B2B. So we sell to agricultural cooperatives, input suppliers, and a lot of it has been around awareness raising of the yield increase, the water consumption decrease, which is key for countries that suffer long droughts. And key to our marketing has been using demo farms. We've done over 220 trials. So anyone working in the agricultural space will know that you need to see it to believe it, and peer-reviewed journals don't work for farmers. So demo farms, training, and lots of videos, materials. And I guess for us, the sort of, you know, what makes us different from other biochar companies is perhaps that we're operating in emerging economies where the farmers are so price sensitive. You know, our end users earn less than $5 a day. So we've really had to focus on making biochar as affordable as possible. And the interest in carbon credits helps that. I wouldn't say it's enough, but it definitely helps. And what would help even more perhaps is to channel some of this investment to draw down carbon into the setup of new production, because what is happening now is the demand is far greater than the supply of biochar carbon credits. So what I would like to see in the future is all this finance that's going towards carbon goes towards actually setting up new biochar projects. I mean, we're sold out, for example, of our carbon credits, and potentially for the next 2 years. So I think we're in a really exciting time to kind of channel some of this carbon finance into getting more biochar out there and getting more projects up and running, and ultimately more carbon in the soil.
Brilliant. That's a really fantastic answer. Thanks, Heloise. Andy, I know you're something of a serial entrepreneur, and I think you're a branding specialist. And I was just wondering if you can tell me, how do you go about taking a product like biochar, which to my understanding, the end product it generally looks, feels and smells the same. How do you turn that into, how do you differentiate that as a product in your business? And is there a strategy that you have to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's early days, but I think broadly speaking, our feeling is that biochars that are made from natural sources are best used in the natural environment. Biochars that are made from the built environment are best used back in the built environment. Just kind of a general rule of thumb. So if your feedstocks are natural, you can use biochar in soils. If you're or water purification, things like that. If your feedstocks are coming from construction, demolition, or other built environment, human interface, then you're better off using it in things like cement, the built environment, and other non-nature solutions. That said, what do you do from there to differentiate? I mean, certainly there are regular certifications and testings you can do, but then in terms of building the brand, it comes down to how do you want to represent your product? Are you a wholesaler? In which case you're selling large truckloads in bulk to landscape architects or to major landowners. That's our strategy. Or are you a retailer selling a more value-added product like a pelletized fertilizer or a form of built environment, a construction material? And there are so many cool applications, and ultimately it comes down to the creativity and the marketability of the products and the companies who are putting them to market. So it's kind of like any other industry in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally get that. And then, I mean, like any other industry, I guess you're also competing on cost and price, because you've got to make money. Henrietta, how do you drive the cost curves down in this industry to get to a point? I mean, or put it another way, is biochar, are the cost curves low enough to catalyze the volumes that we need to really?
No, not yet today. No. And I mean, everybody, like, we're talking about killer apps here, but I guess what everyone is gravitating towards is the soil, because that is just such a huge application area. And if we're talking about carbon drawdown, of course, you can have an economical killer app on some small scale, super niche target market, like something for, I don't know, let's say battery technologies or something where you have to be highly specialized. But then your volumes are going to be quite small, and you're going to have to replicate some of those successes like 10 million times and not have an error and these kinds of things. So then it's not anymore about getting the volume out and getting enough to actually get some, millions of tons, not to talk about billions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, which is a lot to handle if anyone knows what we're talking about when we talk about gigatons, which I'm sure this audience does. Yeah, but I'd like to add something to this kind of like market development that, yes, we're not there yet. And I think there should be more of a role with governments and with other sort of financiers, not from the venture side, but actually from the grants and the loans and the early project financing, because proper project financing starts at maybe 50 million or something like this as a check size. But at this early stage, when these technologies are still developing, they're still not proven, there's still some risk. And there's a long way to go to get to that economies of scale that we're talking about here. You need loans and grants that are not risky for the company, or that somebody else is is guaranteeing. So that's where, not just in biochar, but any biotech, any, cell-based agriculture or something else, you're going to need upfront investments, and that's not going to come from a commercial bank probably. So really, that's kind of what we also need in this industry to kickstart these, to get there, to get to the economies of scale. And I think, biochar prices are all over the place, and what I've been referred to, I'm sure Andy has another number in his head for the US, but from what I understand, it should get to under $500 per ton before it would be wide scale used in agriculture. And I think that's totally true, and maybe even below that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's really. So $500 a ton is the kind of that's the goal. That's the target. I mean, Heloise, what are you? I mean, how did you go about choosing the technology to produce what you're doing, the biochar that you're making, and how do you think about scale economies to drive the price lower?
So as we are operating in Cambodia, and we really bootstrapped the company, we wanted to start with something that was significantly lower price range than what's available in the US and Europe. And I, for a lot of the decent large scale established pyrolysis companies, you are looking at above $500,000, and then really there's lots more up to $1 million for your first installation. And for a startup in Cambodia, that's just way too risky, and we wanted to start with something smaller. So we actually used a very prototype technology that was supported by UNIDO, manufactured in Vietnam. Only 4 units were developed, and we were one of the 4. We're now actually the only one of the 4 that's still running. And that's really been, thanks to our amazing team in Cambodia, and a lot of sweat and maintenance. And so we're still using a very small scale technology developed in Vietnam, but we've now improved the design, and we are about to build our second unit with a significantly improved design. However, there is still a gap for that technology that's under $500,000, but can get the economies of scale. But I do feel there are some new players coming on board, and that is quite exciting. And so we're talking to some other technology companies that could actually help us scale. And there's some containerized biochar units, pyrolysis units now, which is really interesting because, setting up a new factory or, production unit is not just the pyrolysis, it's everything else. And, especially if you're starting on a piece of land in a field in Cambodia, the concrete is very expensive. And so are the buildings and everything else. So something containerized is very exciting, and there's some interesting players on that front. And for us, in terms of economies of scale, we our model really is produce locally and sell locally. I don't think anyone is probably that interested in shipping biochar around the world, and for us, it's really just about more localized production centers and streamlining our internal systems. And for the price point, what we're doing with Cambodian farmers is working out the return on investment per meter squared. I mean, they're so price sensitive. So we're proving, if you put this amount of biochar on your crops, you will get this many extra dollars at the end of the cycle. And we've had 29% yield increase on the first cycle with our products, which, depending on the crop that you're growing, could be a 15 to 25% revenue increase for farmers. And where I think now the research is going and needs to go further is, what is that break-even point for different crops? And where we're moving towards is specializing. So biochar for rice farmers are the poorest. They're more like $3 a day. And biochar for horticulture, biochar for fruit and higher value crops. So that price point and return on investment for farmers is really key, and there's still a lot of work to do in that field.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting that the sort of the product has to be right for the market. I just wondered if we could sort of step back a little bit and throw a question to Andy or to you, Henrietta or Heloise. Can you walk me through how biochar draws down and locks up carbon? And there's a word that's sort of bouncing around in the industry and the carbon world called additionality. And Andy, could I throw that question to you? You know, what is the basic process of pyrolysis in locking up carbon, and how do we go about measuring that?
Yeah, well, you may have asked the least knowledgeable person on the panel, but in simple terms, and I think Henrietta hit on this earlier, is that when plants decompose or are combusted through natural or anthropomorphic process, they release greenhouse gases back up in the atmosphere. So what biochar is effectively doing is hacking into that process and storing that carbon away in the form of charcoal, or in this case, biochar. And instead of combusting that biochar, then you use that biochar in some very stable form. In our case, putting it in soil. People are looking at putting it in cement or in roads, the built environment, filtration systems, et cetera. So the science has shown that it's a very persistent and stable form of charcoal, of carbon, can last thousands of years in its most stable form. So that's kind of the basic explanation. In terms of the conversion of how you understand how much carbon is actually stored, it's roughly 2.5 to 3x the weight of the biochar. So for every ton of biochar you produce, you are sequestering somewhere between 2.5 and 3 tons of CO2 equivalent, depending on the pyrolysis process. And the methodologies that are being established are trying to get at exactly what that amount is, subtract the transportation and the other leakage. And that's kind of the general formula. I will point out that Microsoft recently picked 15 projects to award for its carbon emission reduction investments. Out of those 15, if I'm not mistaken, 3 of them were biochar. So that's 20% of their allocation. And that says a lot about the efficacy, the verifiability, and the stability of biochar as a natural-based carbon reduction strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if it's good enough for Microsoft, then it's definitely good enough for me. I'm just wondering, maybe Henrietta, you could talk a little bit about additionality, and because my understanding is that not only does the process of creating biochar lock up carbon and therefore carbon dioxide because the plants aren't decomposing, etc., but the way that you use it can have additional benefits too.
Yeah, so maybe just to touch upon the topic, like how does it lock in carbon, or how do you know how much carbon is in the biochar, is that, for example, for our walnut shell carbon, we can send it to a laboratory and get the exact amount of fixed carbon that is in the material that we've produced. And then when we calculate that fixed carbon content and the actual physical weight of that carbon, we get to an absolute carbon number that is in that amount of biochar that we have. And so if that would be oxidized, then you would, AKA the carbon would grab onto oxygen atoms, then you would get to the amount of CO2. So you can kind of reverse engineer it or forward engineer it. And basically what happens is most biochar processes take woody waste, it can be wood or rice husks or something, and you are able to contain about 50% of the absolute carbon is stored, and 50% is lost as processed gases, or if you make bio oils as bio oils. So that's like approximately the thing. So additionality is super fun because I think 3 of us in this group actually had a different kind of opinion on additionality. So additionality in the carbon drawdown context means that if this process wasn't there, would that carbon drawdown have happened anyway? And so for biochar, if the biochar process was not there, no, the carbon drawdown would not have happened because that biomass would have been decomposed or burned or something else, and it would just return as greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So I think it's a great process to think about in that, and that's why I believe the IPCC also mentioned it in their report. But what I understand as additionality in biochar, which I find the coolest thing in biochar, or one of the coolest things, is that you can actually use the biochar, like Heloise is using it to actually get the soils to be healthier. And in this case, or in biochar, you can actually mix it with nutrients. So a killer app for biochar is mixing it in with any nutrients, whether it's in a biodigester or with compost or something, because it'll actually limit those other greenhouse gases, like methane or NOxes or other things. And this is still obviously needs science, because every single nutrient and soil and biochar is different. So you have like thousands of variables that you're dealing with at any given time. But this kind of a tool that can actually hold down other greenhouse gases, or you can use in applications where it's substituting more polluting materials, is actually where you get not just the drawdown effect, but then the knock-on effect with other greenhouse gas drawdown. So that's the very, very cool thing about biochar, I think, that has been overlooked forever. And now that there's more focus on, oh, okay, we need to actually get to net zero as a world. Otherwise, this globe is going to get 2 degrees warmer. 2 degrees is a very bad thing, because the last ice age was only 6 degrees colder. So you can imagine what it does on the warmer end. So, okay, so this carbon drawdown is serious. We need to bring it down. It's not just enough that we cut our emissions. So it's kind of getting a new role in this whole space.
So,
Yeah.
so if I was, sorry, Andy, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to hit that point one more time, because I think it's so profound. Not all strategies are needed, and DAX is an example of a strategy that we need, all hands on deck. But imagine if DAX addressed, when it pulled carbon out of the air, there were benefits. And then when it took the CO2 and put it into the ground, there were benefits. That's what biochar is doing. When we take our waste feedstocks and we convert them into biochar, we're eliminating a waste stream that typically creates problems. And then when we take our biochar and we apply it to things like soil or water filtration or something else, it creates tremendous value. So it's not just a carbon sequestration strategy, it's a soil improvement strategy and a waste mitigation strategy. And that's profound within the world of drawdown. There are very few other solutions that I've come across that have that abundance of co-benefits. And it's just, I think, to those of us who love biochar, a beautiful thing.
Yeah, brilliant. Heloise.
Just one more point on the co-benefits. There's a really exciting thing about, I'll show you again, this, with any biochar, not just rice husk biochar, is the porosity. So when you send this biochar to the lab, yes, you have the carbon content, and I know the context of this conversation is carbon drawdown, but for us at Husk, the porosity of the biochar, i.e. its ability to absorb water, nutrients, and to act as like a hotel for microorganisms, which was a great expression from John Liu, who was one of the first people that talked to me about biochar many times, many years ago. So the porosity is really significant, and our biochar is 220 meters squared per gram. So, I'm sure you can all visualize the gram of biochar, you spread out all of its surface area, and you've got 220 meters. And what can happen on those 220 meters is the water can hold on. So an anecdote from one of our farmers is, before using biochar, I used to water my seedlings 3 times a day. Now I only water once. I mean, this is really key for farmers in the context of climate change for these water scarce regions across the world. I think the water holding capacity of biochar is really interesting. But also, and I guess this reflects on Henrietta's point about the other emissions that we are avoiding, is the nutrient retention. So we are still, out there to prove how much less chemical fertilizer does a farmer have to use, because it's not being leached away in his sandy soil, or his soil that doesn't have that porosity, that carbon to hold on to. So the porosity is relevant for the nutrients. And I did glance in the chat. Yes, we also add nutrients to our biochar. So we charge it with different macro and micronutrients. And I think this porosity and what that does to the soil, and what that enables farmers to do in terms of grow more food, which is from us, a key part of the challenge in our outset, is really key. So yes, carbon drawdown is why we're here, but at the same time, this is restoring our soils, and 1/3 of the planet and now has degraded soils. We set up the company in Spain, and when we started this, 29% of Spain was already desert. And if we continue on the current intensive agriculture practices with degrading soil organic matter, we go to 50% of Spain being desert by 2050. And I'm sure California has some shocking similar statistics. So soil regeneration, I think, is as it's up there with climate change as important. So the porosity, don't forget porosity. That's all I'm saying.
Brilliant.
I have to compliment Heloise on this, because people don't understand that biochar is both a mitigation tool and an adaptation tool to climate change. Here in the Nordics, the Baltic Sea is absolutely almost dead. It has way too many nutrients that have come from agriculture into the sea, and basically it has deoxygenated environments now. And that's with climate change, there are less winters, and actually the soil is much more prone to erosion. So the problem is just going to go faster and faster. And these are the kind of things that we could start solving.
Brilliant. I mean, wow. I mean, it's just like an endlessly fascinating subject in terms of the science, which I imagine there's still a lot more to discover and understand about how we can use it to solve problems at both ends of the production chain. So I'm going to now pop quiz you very quickly. You've got to give me, what is your killer app, and can you give any words of advice to entrepreneurs who want to get into this space today? And that's to you, Andy.
We think the killer app is agriculture, and it's going to start with the highest value crops, nuts and berries, and then it's, we believe, going to move into commodity crops as the economics improve. In terms of entrepreneurism, I mean, I am one, so I can relate. I think the key with biochar is that we get charmed pretty quickly. And in that stupor of charm, we can get kind of distracted and enamored of every possibility. And I think the key for this industry is to focus. Kathleen Draper talks about this in her 5 steps of romance, I think, or love affair with biochar. But I've experienced it myself firsthand, so I can relate. So I think the key is to focus, to be super collaborative and open with others, realizing that we all have to succeed if we are all going to succeed, because in this case, there's so much work to be done that there genuinely is room for everyone. And so take a small slice of it, do it really well, and partner with everyone else to help succeed. That's what I would say.
Great, thanks, Andy. So, Heloise, have you got anything to add? Killer app first, please.
Killer app is very similar. It's soil regeneration. For me, that is the killer app. That's what biochar set itself out to do thousands of years ago, and it's still doing it. And thanks to us, we can speed it up a little bit. So soil regeneration, and for other entrepreneurs, I would say, I mean, I really agree with everything Andy said. I think it's very, very key to have a focus. I would say, yeah, share the passion, because this is a passionate subject and it is a way of engaging the people that you need on board, whether they are team members or investors or clients or distributors. You know, it is a passionate, exciting subject, particularly because it's an age-old nature-based solution, and I think that's what runs through everyone's veins. It's a very natural part of us. So share the passion, work out the economics, like to the detail, particularly for the clients. You know, a client needs to see the bottom line. What is the return on investment? And even if that means, you know, that's, we're working out per meter squared per crop, and there are plenty of resources out there to try and work that out. So I think the return on investment for the users is really key, and that is complex. And for example, in our case, the reduction in water use or the reduction in fertilizer use is part of the economics. It's not just the yield increase. So work out the return on investment. And then the third is just more really a sort of, you know, a challenge for all of us is to work out how we can lever this carbon finance, this wave of carbon finance that, as Henrietta said, it's not even just 6 months or, you know, every month, every day, it's getting stronger. So how, as a kind of community of biochar entrepreneurs and supporters, can we tap into that in a way that it's not just making the biochar a little bit cheaper, but actually it's financing new projects, and it's really helping us scale in a significant way. And I think, you know, it's perhaps our voice as maybe people who've been in the game for a while, to try and put out that message that this carbon finance is not enough to just subsidize biochar. We need to invest in more biochar projects and make it more affordable.
Great.
That's my take.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Heloise. It's really good to hear that from you. Henrietta, what are your observations? Killer app first.
I'll say something different, but I think the killer app for biochar is to tap into the nutrient cycle, and you can do that both on the sides of the soil, of course, but also on the water side. So we've been looking a little bit more into water-related biochar applications, and that's pretty cool. So biochar can act as a bio-based alternative to activated carbons in certain applications. Activated carbons are quite polluting to manufacture, and there you can actually capture nutrients first and then use the biochar where it should go in in the soil after you've captured some nutrients. So there's a lot of sort of circular business models in biochar as well, where you can kind of put it in one place and it'll end up in another place down the line, down the value chain, which is exciting. Maybe a few things for entrepreneurs. One is that there's still very little heavy productization on biochar applications. So if you feel the urge to dive into a niche market, there is a lot of space still. Kind of echoing what Andy was saying. And maybe the other thing is to, understand the financing and what it really takes on that side up front, and evaluate your technologies and everything really, really well before investing into anything crazy, major. And
Brilliant. Okay.
And just do it. Start a company. That's the main thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm sort of talking to Tito and Jason now. I think we're sort of coming to the wrapping up stage. We've got 5 minutes to go before Jason and Tito will kind of come up with some concluding comments. I'm just scouring the questions from the audience, and
yeah, we had a couple of, if I may, Paul, we had a couple of questions about energy sources, as in kind of relating to maybe LC life cycle assessments and techno-economic assessments, how you might perform those.
Is that to anybody?
Just to the panel. I think there was a curiosity I noticed in maybe 2 or 3 of the questions.
Yeah. it's a really, really good question, and this is one of the things that you should really pay attention to when looking at biochar technologies. So we need a little bit of input electricity for supporting devices, but we don't need heat for the actual process to work. So our process is actually exothermic as a technology. So it releases heat, does not need it. And so in other words, I guess you could say that we use part of the biomass to actually power the system itself. And typically biochar pyrolysis systems are sort of oven things that you heat from externally. And so in that case, you will need some external heat for that, and that should be calculated in a life cycle assessment. Take another one.
We also use a small amount of electricity to generate some of the moving parts, fans particularly. And then we do use LPG just at the starting phase, just at the setup. And that's, I think, very typical across pyrolysis, as Henrietta said, to generate that initial heat. But once we get to the sufficient temperature, then the syngas that we generate is self-perpetuating. So there's no need for external sources. And we include in our life cycle analysis that electricity and the initial starter fuel. And then it's a continuous process. But of course, you also have batch processes. I'm sure everyone here is probably using a continuous flow system.
Yeah, I did have actually a question for you, Heloise. Sorry to butt in.
Yeah.
Because you use wood vinegar is a byproduct of the pyrolysis process, which I guess the name gives it away. It's a sort of a vinegar from wood. What my understanding is that in Cambodia and in Asia, it's used as a pesticide. So I'm really interested if you can just talk about that quickly, and why don't we know about it in Europe and the US?
Sure. So it's technically pyroligneous acid, and in our case, it's AKA rice husk vinegar. And interestingly, in Cambodia, in the very kind of rudimentary oil drum type pyrolysis kits that evolved after the pile of rice husk with a metal tube in it, which was the first means of making biochar from rice husk. The Cambodians would also capture the wood vinegar, and they have a word for it, which is biochar water, basically. So it's actually cooked rice husk water, because the words are composites like that. And it's used as a natural pesticide. And there are, in Thailand, there are about 5 different brands of wood vinegar. It's very popular, I think, in Asia because there are so many chemical pesticides used. And there is increasing concern on the health implications of that, not just for the food, but for the workers. So having a product that, again, anecdote from one of my farmers is now it's easier to find labor, because you don't have to have people spraying nasty chemicals, and they can be spraying something that's not harmful. So we've had that tested in labs in Australia. It's totally safe. And why has it not taken up? It's still, I think it is a bit of a mystery still to me. It feels like most of the research has been done in Asia on wood vinegar, and there hasn't been that peer-reviewed wealth of literature that biochar has had for wood vinegar. I also think this is potentially because it has different functions. So one is a natural pesticide, which is how we sell it, because that's what the market wants. But I know in the US, there's also a lot of research around it as a stimulant, a biostimulant to increase root growth and stem thickness. But I think it's just there's not very much literature on that, and it's still early days. So we're testing it out in the market in Southeast Asia, and hopefully we can spread that. That is more easy to export than the biochar, so that's an interesting byproduct.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Well, I mean, I think it sort of remains for me to thank you, Andy, Heloise, and Henrietta. That was just brilliant. I've certainly learned a huge amount as a biochar newbie, and it's just really fantastic to hear how you guys have been, developing your markets and changing the world for the better. So massive congratulations to you guys. You should be tremendously proud of yourselves. And I am now handing the reins back to Jason and Tito.
Thanks, Paul, for being such such a skillful moderator today. And thanks, Heloise and Henrietta and Andy, for a really insightful discussion. And also thanks to all of you as an audience. I mean, just looking at the chat, it's a really cracking discussion that I'm seeing going on, and lots of connections being made. So, which is always wonderful to see. After we get off here, just to note that we are recording this. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. So Tito, if you could post a link to that, that would be fantastic, so that people know to look to there if they missed any of the insights that came from our conversations today. Also, our post-event survey is a way of registering satisfaction, dissatisfaction. We're always open to feedback, so happy to hear from anyone here about what your opinions were about our conversation today. Also, if you are interested in continuing discussions, we have a brand new minted biochar channel in our AirMiners Slack that you can where we can keep on discussing all aspects of biochar. And speaking of AirMiners Slack, you can get on AirMiners Slack by joining AirMiners. Look at airminers.org, submit an application, and we will review and go from there. In the future, we have a couple of events to keep in mind. One is this Friday, we're having a Friday afternoon networking event at 12 noon Pacific for those interested to have a round robin networking discussion, dynamic networking in Zoom breakout rooms, so we can get to know each other and start collaborating with one another. Second, next Thursday, the 25th, we have a Women AirMiners event about how to develop a successful carbon dioxide removal company. All are welcome to that. It is a very interesting conversation that we have in the mix. So for those links, take a look on our AirMiners event calendar, where we have the where we have the Eventbrite registration available for those events as well. And Tito's going to share them in the chat. So thank you very much for that, Tito. Finally, thanks everyone who also contributed to make today's event a carbon negative event through our rigorous methodologies. We are able to draw down and remove the carbon generated by virtue of our meeting with well over 100 people in our meeting today. So thank you everyone for your generous voluntary contributions to that. Much appreciated. And with that, I'm going to cease the Tito. If anything to add, or no, good. Okay, cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And with that, I'm going to cease the recording. Feel free to hang on for our networking discussions today. And with that, I will see you next time.